I am David Oliver from University of Houston, Associate Vice Chancellor, Associate Vice President for Facilities, Construction Management, and I have a co-presenter who I will let him introduce himself. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Irvin. As you can tell from the shirt, I'm no longer at the University of Houston. I'm now at University of Tennessee as Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities there. But before that, I was at the University of Houston for 10 years. And so David and I are going to tag team a little bit. And we have a colleague from Houston Baptist who will probably can probably fill in as well. Because Houston, unfortunately, gets hit quite often with hurricanes. And I see we have Armando from Puerto Rico, and I'm sure he has some great stories because he's in the middle of all this. So we've kind of learned over the years, because Houston gets hit all the time, some of the things that have worked and some of the things that you should do. And I think we're going to tell you a little bit about two of the many storms that have hit Houston, but then also try to let you know some of the lessons learned that are applicable, whether you're talking about a weather event or some other kind of disaster. So.
With that, as I said, we're going to tag team you today. So I'm going to kick us off here. Like I said, welcome to Houston. For those of you who aren't from the Houston or Houston area, hope you're enjoying your stay. It's a beautiful, beautiful area up here in the Woodlands. I don't get up here very often. I tend to live on the south side. But let me go in and give you a little bit of a, sort of set the stage a little bit on context of what we have here at the University of Houston. We have, university is a part of a University of Houston system, for those of you who are familiar with it. We have 4 component campuses. Our central campus, which is the flagship campus, has a little over 40,000 students. But we also have components down in UH downtown, UH Clear Lake, and at UH Victoria, all of which were in the path of, I think, most of our major hurricanes, specifically for Harvey, for sure. So we have about 14.5 million square feet here on our primary campus. It is consisting of all the normal classrooms, laboratories, you name it. We have an opera house, significant athletic facilities, pretty much all the major stuff that any university, Tier 1 university would have. 160 buildings. And as I mentioned a moment ago, pretty much all of everybody we have lives in the impact zone, which makes it even more challenging, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Of course, we have student housing, about 8,000 beds on campus right now. And we had about 2,000 students stay and weather the storm out on campus. So it was a significant impact to have students, because now you have other support services that you've got to deal with. We do have something called Braised Bayou. For those of you who are not in or from Houston, that is literally just a big floodway. It empties out into, eventually down into the bay, but comes out of the central area campus. It goes right by the campus. It is about 100 feet deep, 300 to 400 feet wide when it's empty. Let me just say, during Harvey, it looked like the Mississippi River running. So it was a significant flood issue next to the campus. Of course, we are an urban campus, which brings with it all sorts of the normal urban type of issues that you get into. Accessibility, it can be difficult getting to the campus, and as well as just generally speaking, we are in the what we call Third Ward area campus, or excuse me, Third Ward area of Houston, which was one of the older areas of Houston. We have a very flat area. Houston, the University of Houston campus is very little fall. So that makes drainage very slow. So that impacts us when we get into significant rain events. I think we've all heard this adage from Benjamin Franklin. Ironically enough, most of us think he was talking about health-related items, but it really wasn't. He was talking about emergency management. He was talking about specifically fire life safety. And pretty much in 200 years, not much has changed. This is something that we still deal with today. Our method of preventing or preparing for emergencies starts with NIMS. Most of you know the National Incident of Emergency Management System, excuse me. Most of my major staff, senior staff, are trained in NIMS. It is something that you can sort of hang your hat on when you get into an emergency situation because folks know and understand the organizational structure that goes into place. So if you're not using NIMS or you haven't looked at it closely, I would strongly suggest you do so because it is, in essence, the way you want to do business when you get into an emergency management situation. Underneath that, and each one of these are sort of subsets of each other, we do have our own University Emergency Management Plan, which addresses many different types of emergencies, everything from shooters to hurricanes to just about anything else you can think of. And then subset to that, we do have a specific hurricane planning guide, which, as Dave mentioned, hurricanes are a constant threat for this area, and we get hit pretty regularly. And I will talk a little bit about facilities. Specifically to facilities, we have what we call a ride-out guide. For those of you who aren't familiar, the term ride-out means literally that. They ride out the storm on the campus, living in cots and eating out of the dining hall if it's available, otherwise MREs, that type of emergency sort of situation. So these are sort of the basic tenets of how we prepare and hopefully manage through an emergency event. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he is going to talk about storms, specifically Allison, and maybe a little bit about Ike. And then I'll follow up with a little bit about Hurricane Harvey. So, Dave, take it away.
Well, I'm from Nebraska originally, so we know nothing about hurricanes. And I actually came to the University of Houston, and a month later we were hit by Allison. So it's sort of trial by water. And I learned very quickly about emergency preparedness and about hurricanes. Luckily, we had a great staff. Allison was actually a tropical storm, which sounds like, oh, well, no big deal. It's because hurricanes obviously are rated by wind, not by rain. Allison was a huge rain event, and it formed very quickly, so we didn't get the normal kind of preamble that you sometimes get with hurricanes. It formed, and one day later it hit the coast. And it kind of couldn't make up its mind, so it hit the coast of Houston, went back out to sea. It did that 3 separate times. And because of that, in a 2-week period, we had 42 inches of rain on campus, with 10 of it coming in the first 3 hours. So everything was completely saturated, and then when it came back the third time, there was no place for the water to go. And as David said, the main bayou that drains the medical center and a big portion of the campus goes right by, or a big portion of the city goes right by the campus. So it's a huge, huge event. Just a few of the stats from it, citywide, over 90,000 research animals in the medical center alone were destroyed during Allison. It was the deadliest tropical storm in U.S. history, so more deadly than Sandy even. 51 dead, 30,000 homeless, so a major, major storm. And the University of Houston was unfortunately unprepared. We'd been hit by hurricanes before, but I think that institutional knowledge had all left. And so we kind of had to scramble a little bit. Luckily, like facilities folks, we have great teams, and so they were able to do that. I won't spend a lot of time and read these slides for you, but these are some of the shots of the city during Allison. The University of Houston downtown is what you see in this lowest corner, so that gives you an idea of what most of the UH campuses looked like during Allison. The slides that you see elsewhere are slides taken right around campus, so it gives you an idea. It was almost impossible to get to campus. Because it hit so quickly, we didn't have anything in the way of pumps and those kind of things in place. And because it hit so quickly, we didn't have people writing things out. That was a thing that was added after Allison, so that we didn't have that precaution of folks in place when it happened. These slides that you see here are all taken on campus during the height of Allison. Over $250 million in damage to the university. And the university at the time did a lot of things that in hindsight were pretty stupid. They put all of the mechanical and electrical equipment in the basements. We had a lot of buildings that had 2 or 3 stories, still do, below grade. And so in order to, for security reasons and for climate control reasons, the most valuable library books, rare books, all those kinds of things were 2 or 3 stories below ground, which obviously is not what you do in a hurricane-prone area. That's actually one of the areas that you see there. This was taken right next to campus. So a huge amount of damage. I've talked with our colleague from Puerto Rico. We'll talk in a second. There's some actual silver linings of all this, but it all faced us really quickly. We were fairly successful in that we very quickly prioritized protection of life, and we didn't lose any people. We didn't lose any research animals, in contrast to our folks on the Med Center. And we very quickly determined that what we needed to do from an operational standpoint is we had to be up and running within 2 weeks, because we had a significant summer session. UH does a huge amount of summer work, folks that come back to the city of Houston and do summer school. And if we couldn't get up and running, we would lose all that tuition revenue, and we wouldn't have a way to fund getting back in place. So we very quickly decided that what we had to do was triage all of the buildings and figure out how do we get on board as quickly as possible. So we did a whole number of things. We immediately nationalized all space, including all athletic space. If any of you have major athletic departments, you know that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But all of our basketball courts, for instance, became lab space. We immediately, all faculty that could telecommuted, and each department only had one key office, and we set those up in the basketball arena, in the basketball suites. We ended up using, we basically called on all of our alumni. So colleges like business, law, architecture that had significant outside firms that could get up and running, we used those as outside places for class labs. Bottom line is within 2 weeks we were back up and running, and we lost no tuition revenue. All the students we were able to keep on track and continue to matriculate. Some of the buildings weren't online for 2 or 3 months, or in some cases a couple of years. But because of what we were able to do very quickly, we were able to get back up and running. One of the things that was kind of interesting was when we went to get insurance, the state of Texas would not insure anybody along the Gulf Coast. I don't know if that's changed now, but and no U.S. group would insure the University of Houston because of the huge damage. So we ended up having to go to Lloyd's of London for our insurance. And in order to get insurance from Lloyd's of London, one of the great silver linings was they said we had to do remediation. So they forced us to do what we should have done to start with. And we did about $75 million in remediation initially, ended up about $100 million in remediation. So we relocated all of that equipment that was in the basements. So all of a sudden, all of those deferred maintenance issues that we had with old building systems were taken care of. We had new roofs because the roofs failed. Those all got redone. We added pumps, we added generators. Around all of the major buildings, we added earthen berms. Although if you go to campus now, you really can't tell that because they were all landscaped in. We added flood doors, and those doors will trigger automatically once the water gets to a certain level, so they don't require someone to do it. They don't require electricity to do that. We started and developed a pretty extensive emergency preparedness plan. You can kind of read through all the things we did. So again, it was a necessity because of insurance. It forced us to do what we really needed to do. It also forced us to look at all of our business practices. So it forced us to, with the colleges, look at, what do you need for business interruption? What's the risk management? And that's a lesson that I've been able to use at Tennessee, and I think you all could use anywhere. Whether you're in a hurricane zone or it's some other kind of disaster, what are the key things you need in terms of business interruption? And how do you prioritize those things? So we were talking this morning about deferred maintenance. That feeds into this as well. So all of those things are kind of integrated. And I think Houston has done a good job of that, and under David's leadership has kind of gone on from there.
I'm going to talk quite a bit about Harvey, and some of the things that Dave mentioned a moment ago were instrumental in minimizing the damage that we saw from Harvey. So with that being said, I think a lot of us remember Harvey. It's pretty recent. I know some folks are dealing with Irma. Harvey was a Category 4 hurricane, but I will tell you flat out, it didn't start out that way, and when we were seeing it and watching it, it was a tropical depression south of Cuba. It ended up coming over Yucatan Peninsula into the Gulf, and then it went from 0 to Category 4, like literally overnight. So we were looking at it in the Gulf, thinking, okay, it looked like some rain, maybe, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a Category 4 hurricane with 156 miles per hour winds hitting us. Now, it did come in, as you can see here, south of Houston. We were on the dirty side, so we caught heck from the beginning. But they didn't stop there. It went into about Rockport, stopped, stalled, went back out into the Gulf, up the coast to Galveston, and came back ashore. Then it stopped again. It was bumping up against a high-pressure ridge there in the central Texas area, and then it just stopped and set over Houston for about 5 days. So we ended up getting about 50 inches of rain as an average across Houston. Some areas got a lot more, some a little less. But over average, we were about 50 inches, which the meteorologists all said this would be equivalent to a 1,000-year flood event. And you know for a fact, we don't design for 1,000-year floods. So that was, in essence, what we were dealing with Hurricane Harvey. Over to the right here, you see a picture. That is a auxiliary area with a bunch of retail shops off to the left. And as you can see, he's standing in about a little mid-calf water, and off to the left it even gets a little deeper. So I'm not going to show a lot of those same photos that Dave have. I have ones that look exactly like those, so I'm going to refrain from that and talk a little bit about preparedness for us. For preparedness, I think when you start looking at the facilities themselves, what Dave talked about on design standards, we had implemented a number of design standard improvements from lessons learned on Allison and another hurricane that we had shortly after that called Ike, specifically storm doors. We have extensive tunnel system that runs under the campus. It became it's our steam, electrical, all is in this tunnel system, and it had become a route for floodwaters to get around from building to building, and as well as take down our utility system. So Dave mentioned submarine doors. We call them submarine doors because that's what they look like, which we go around and seal up during these events, which keeps water out of our tunnel system. So those are the design standard that we've implemented to address the flooding issues that we have from hurricanes. Preventive maintenance program, we have a strong preventive maintenance program, and we're even making it stronger. But things like floodgates, Dave mentioned those. They require minimal amount of maintenance, but at the same time, if you don't do something, they will and can stick on you. And these things automatically rise to prevent water getting into several of our lower areas on campus, specifically around our housing areas. So very important to maintain what you do get into place. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm a military guy, so you're going to hear me sort of come from that perspective probably. If you don't maintain it, though, or you only have one of them, you can probably expect for it to fail, just to be honest. Now, we all make risk management decisions when we're building a building, and we all sit down at that value engineering session and we start talking about getting rid of emergency generators or tying them into other buildings or so on and so forth. We all know those drills because we deal with them constantly. And we all make risk management decisions in that regard. But I will tell you, if you're playing with and you're in an area like we are, you can't do it, at least not in any building that's critical. What's considered critical? Well, that's going to be something you have to deal with in your own chain of command. But I will tell you, I right now, I have an edict out. We don't build basements anymore. And that's going into our design standard because every basement we had flooded to some degree. So basements are now a thing of the past at the University of Houston, at least while I'm there. So be prepared in terms of making sure you have that type of redundancy in your systems. Pre-storm, we mentioned NIMS a minute ago. We are currently doing our business continuity review and emergency management review as we speak, making sure we're ready for next time. Obviously, we have a lot of lessons learned from Harvey to put into the plan, so we are working on that as we speak. Be ready to implement the plan. Now, we had a couple of false alarms early in the hurricane season before Harvey, so we had already sort of went through a dry run, but make sure you have the ability to implement. I will tell you flat out, if you're waiting on a storm to get on the horizon before you start buying sandbags or having sand delivered or buying sheetrock or filling your generators, then you're probably already too late because everyone else wants that same resource as well. So that is something you need to make sure you have it on plan. Plans are good until the first contact with the enemy. And that's an interesting comment. That's my military background. But the planning is worth its weight in gold. And that means a lot because what you're going to get into is once you get going, things are going to change. I mean, we were getting in the middle of ours, and we had everything locked down. Then all of a sudden they tell me they're bringing up 700 students from the University of Houston at Victoria to live with us. And so out of the blue, I had 700 students on buses heading my way. So you're going to have to adjust and deal with it. It is what it is. There's not much I can tell you, but if you've got a good group that's planned and went through this process, you're going to be in great shape.
I'll add a little bit to that. Kind of one of the things from Allison, after the event, I was talking to the provost and I asked why we didn't have an emergency plan because nobody seemed to know that we had one. And he was shocked. He's like, well, we have an emergency plan. And I said, well, where is it? And he proceeds to go into the storage room and he pulls out this thing that's literally the size of an airplane baggage thing that is loaded with binders. So there's probably 50 binders there that are each this thick. That's the emergency preparedness plan for the University of Houston. Well, you know, obviously that's totally worthless. First off, no one's going to read all that. Secondly, nobody's going to remember it. And literally no one had coordinated any of it. So what we've learned, and I'm sure you all know this as well, we're kind of stating the obvious, and it goes to the second part that plans are worthless. Certainly you want to do plans, but you need to make sure that they're accessible. So they need to be both something you can get digitally and that you've got paper copies. But more important, it's important that the folks who have to implement those plans and their backups so that you're 3 or 4 deep are used to working with each other. So the first time they work with each other isn't when they have an emergency. And that's kind of obvious. I mean, in terms of us working with IT or us working within facilities, we do all that all the time. But I think we've got some other slides that talk about you really need to make sure that your colleagues on the academic side, your colleagues on the research side, you're also doing emergency planning with them because you'll find it's amazing how much they're expecting us to do and just assume we're going to do it. And so it's important that you, when you're doing planning, that you involve those folks as well.
Thank you, Dave. As you can see, we've both have similar backgrounds here in terms of dealing with hurricanes at Harvey. As I said a moment ago, I'm not going to put up more flood pictures. You guys saw those. I have ones that are similar. You wouldn't even know they were different hurricane because they look the same. But I did want to focus a little bit on recovery efforts. These are some photos from recovery. And this is pretty solid. This is after the floodwaters dissipated, and we were dealing with, I think we freaking bought every piece of carpet in town to deal with carpet issues and trees down and you name it. These are the types of things you'll have to deal with on a regular basis.
This slide is the satellite street union. During hurricanes, that area, and it's, as you can tell, it's a grade below grade, below ground level. During hurricanes, the water there is actually 6 foot above that railing. So that gives you an idea of the kind of water this area of campus will get during a hurricane.
Absolutely. That is one of our, that's one of those areas that make basements in Houston a bad idea. Talk a little bit about expectations because this is, I think, gets into now how do you manage this at a higher level. Our chancellor, with input from me and several other VPs, committed to opening on 5 September. Now, we couldn't even get on campus till 30th of August, so we had about 6 days to get the campus ready. Now, the 5th was a Tuesday. Monday being the Labor Day holiday. So my staff worked tirelessly 24/7 from the time we could get on campus till the opening on the 5th of September. We were able to achieve, in our metric we use, with classroom availability, because ultimately that is what we're there for. That is our mission. I will tell you that we probably had considerably smaller percentage in terms of office space in other areas, but we were able to achieve 98% classroom availability, and the registrar was able to schedule around that. So as Dave mentioned, you don't have to refund tuition, because we were at the very beginning of the semester as well. So we were literally the first week of school. So, but, you know, she stepped out there and she wanted that date, and we were more or less advised to make it work. And that was before we even got on campus, so I didn't even know what we were dealing with. Fortunately, we were able to make it work. I will talk, before I move on, I want to talk a little bit about the map, as well as the little bar graph at the bottom. When we got into this, starting on the Friday the 1st, after we got into and started assessing our buildings, the first question out of everybody's mouth was, how bad is it? What's the situation? So we used our planning department to put together an interactive map. That map up on the top was on our website, that showed which buildings were actively being worked on, which were not available, and which were needed some type of work. So that was updated every day, and well as our briefs with the chancellor, and as to what we were dealing with and what buildings were affected. Because we quickly got into a lot of questions, especially from the faculty and staff, about, okay, can I come on campus, and can I go check my office, can I go check my lab? So we were basically trying to provide some type of information to get feedback out there to everybody. Talked about DEMS already. Make sure you have some key decision makers in the EOC, and EOC's Emergency Operations Center. We have a very good director of our emergency management program that was there. I was on the phone constantly. I had a ride-out team leader that was on campus. Just remember what your role is and where you're at in the process. As senior leaders, we tend to want to get involved, but ultimately you can't be there stepping on toes, because they're dealing with the on-site issue. So unless you're there on-site, part of that program, stay out of it. Let them deal with it. Just support them if they need any information. Senior leaders won't need and expect information. I told you a moment ago, and you saw the update report that we did. I could not give them enough information. I literally could not. I could have been on the phone 24/7, feeding them information to the chancellor's office, to my boss, to media relations, to you name it, to the governor's office. We were getting calls from everybody and anybody. And so you have to manage that. And I will tell you that they want all that information, and they want it now. And there's not a lot of discussion about it. So you have to come kind of work with that. And I had some really good, great people that helped me manage that. I have a director of my communications department of the facilities who was key in making that work. I will tell you that when we got into these discussions, as a facilities leader, you're going to be one of the key people at the table. They're going to look at you and say, what's our status? Can we open? Is this building available? Those are the kind of questions that are going to be thrown at you every time you have any type of update meeting. So just be ready. You will be expected to have that kind of information.
And I'll tag team on that. That's going to be the case even if you're not dealing with a weather situation, and even if you're not dealing with a situation, an emergency situation that doesn't seem to be facilities related. Let me give you a quick example. We recently had a white supremacist on campus with a lot of groups coming that wanted to recreate Charlottesville at Nashville, or at Knoxville. And so we did a ton of planning. It was a different kind of emergency situation. Obviously, law enforcement, our police department, Homeland Security were the main folks, and they were the incident commanders, to use NIM speak. But facilities was a key part of that, because we could give them status of where groups were. We could tell them which cameras were working. They needed vehicles to block streets so that we couldn't have someone driving through like Charlottesville, and they used our dump trucks. They needed extra manpower just to the logistics of keeping the campus closed, because they had to do other things. And that was all in their operations plan. And so we became one of the key folks, even though you wouldn't think a situation like that would involve facilities at all. So we've learned, and I'm sure you guys have learned too, they sometimes will say negative things about facilities, particularly when we have problems. But inevitably, because we have the largest group on campus, and we know the buildings better than anyone else, and we know the campus better than anyone else, and oftentimes we know students in a particular area as well as anyone, you're going to be in the middle of whatever the emergency is. And so we ought to just assume that role and embrace that, because it allows us to be a key developer of events and be able to make sure that as it goes forward and as we deal with the aftermath, whatever that is, we're a key part of making sure that goes the way it ought to.
I think you're next on slides, Dave.
A lot of these lessons are things that were learned not just in Allison Says Allison, but they're really from a lot of things. Inevitably, the university will become not just a key resource for the university and its alums, but it will become sort of the key resource for an area, for a city, for a community, and it needs to be that. Particularly if you're a public university, government will look to the university to lead that. And so your emergency preparedness plan ought to assume that that's the role you're going to have. We have a chance, because we are in meetings like this, and because you do a lot of emergency planning, we have a chance to be up and running quicker than anyone else. At the very least, we're more organized and have more folks that that know about these kind of things. And so they assume that we will be sort of the rock that they will build the rest of their emergency preparedness around. Even if they aren't telling you that, I guarantee you that when FEMA comes in, they will assume that. So assume that in terms of when you're doing planning. We've already mentioned before, but business continuity and risk management are absolutely imperative. So when you look at your emergency plan, whether it's an active shooter or whatever it is, think about what's most important for your business to continue operating and to get up and running quickly. We've mentioned that it's classrooms, and in most cases it is, but you may have other key parts, key components that need to be up and running very quickly. Kind of touched on it, you need to know the emergency preparedness plans of everybody in the university, because I guarantee you they are making assumptions about what your team is going to do, and if you don't know what those are, you're going to have some problems. So for instance, like many of you, we've been addressing or looking at our plans for active shooters. And amazingly, what I found was almost every college in their plan for active shooters assumed that facilities are going to go around and lock all the doors of all the classrooms during the active shooting. Probably not what our guys are going to do or what we'd want them to do. So obviously we had to change that. But those were the assumptions they were making, so their whole plan was based on that. And I think you'll find similar kinds of things as you go through. This one's important, and I think most of you probably do it, but enter in as many contracts as you can before the event. So that means you should be doing it now. FEMA will pay you quicker if you've done that beforehand. If you have not done that, then you have to go through a lot more justification, and you'll go to the back of the line. If you've got those pre-existing contracts and you can point to those, and that's what you've called on, you will be paid much, much quicker, which obviously is important from a cash flow standpoint. And what we found in Allison and Ike both, I don't know if you had that experience in Harvey, was the federal government came in and took a lot of our contracts and assumed them and gave them to other folks. So we had to have redundant suppliers, because that was the only way we could get some of those key things that we needed. If that's a key thing for you and you're not able to have redundant suppliers, then maybe you need to have those things on site so that you're ready to go, even if those contracts are pulled or if that supplier can't get to you because of some other issue. And then the other thing we did after Allison and Ike was we worked with our academic colleagues to look at how can they do more things with telecommuting. So maybe they don't normally do things online, but there's a way that they can teach part of their class online. So we were able to take a lot of the sort of general lecture classes, a lot of those kind of things, and move them off campus or move them online, so we didn't have to try to create those classrooms. And we only had to then create classrooms for labs and some of the things that absolutely had to be on campus. So you might look at that in terms of your emergency preparedness as well.
I said earlier that you're going to be inundated with questions, so be ready for the possible questions. Literally the day after the hurricane, I was being asked, how bad is it, how much damage, and I haven't even got in our buildings yet, I don't know. And so those questions start up right away, so be ready for that. We started a lot of our assessment immediately after. We organized in small teams that went around and looked at each building, and they were facilities folks. We tried to pair up trades, and that was how we ended up getting in the buildings and started the process. Now, I will tell you, when I first started looking at the business continuity plan, the question about, well, who's essential came up. Well, I can tell you flat out, everybody is. If you're in the facilities group, you're essential. If you know the buildings and you know where to find stuff, you know where the keys are, you know where the mechanical rooms are, you understand where what as-built is, you're essential in my book in terms of facilities. Because even though planning wasn't necessarily an essential function during the hurricane, they were unbelievably helpful in terms of pulling as-built, and they were doing all that reporting that I showed you right ago, updating the maps. They did unbelievable, but they weren't being planners, I'll tell you that. But they have skills that you need during this process. They were doing estimates on the fly. That's how we ended up with an estimate immediately afterwards. I wanted to talk about custodians. We did not bring our custodians back on day one. We brought them back on day two, and that was a mistake. We brought our maintenance folks back in on day one. The thought was to get in the buildings and make sure they were safe. I will tell you that our custodians showed up en masse, had an 80% show rate first day back. And these were folks that were probably hit as hard or harder than anyone in many cases. So, and they were unbelievable in terms of what they got done during their time there. I'll say that flat out. And then, administrative staff, all I'll say is they kept us all organized. Do not underestimate their abilities to keep us all moving, and just knowing where the key to the supply room is and where all the paper products are and everything else. So trust me, you need those folks, and you need them right away. So if I had to do it all over again, I'd bring everybody back day one and not try to stagger them in. I tell you flat out, that was my mistake. Our ride-out plan anticipated a 24-hour event. It'll be in 5 days. So we did not anticipate that. Now, fortunately, we had enough food and everything else to manage that. But I was on my phone with the ride-out team leader 4 days into this, and I was trying to keep him from freaking out. So he was stressed because he had no sleep for 4 days, and he was getting tasked with all sorts of stuff. And so we've reorganized a little bit to have another senior person on the ride-out team, so they have the ability to take a nap every once in a while and to de-stress for a minute or two. Because I thought I was going to have to swim in and relieve him because he was getting freaked out. The ride-out team quickly changed. As the storm passed, they were getting tasked before we could get on campus to try to fix things and to start water remediation. And I had a crew of about 20 folks there for a 14 million square foot campus. So, their ability to respond to that was very, very limited. They were there for purposes of securing utilities and making sure that if we had a problem that they could deal with it immediately, but they were not set up to do wholesale remediation. So, and I talked a little bit about our classes resuming in 6 days. That was a very high bar. Ultimately, we were in great shape because of the last item. I'll take luck over skill any day. We never lost power, which is crazy. We never did. The hurricane came in South Texas, spun around, came back in later. By the time it got over Houston, it was a tropical storm, and most of the wind had come out of it, so we actually never lost power. It glitched on and off a few times, but because we never lost power, our sump pumps kept pumping and kept the damage to an absolute minimum. So that was just pure luck. I'm not going to pretend that it was anything other than that.
I'd add a couple of other lessons learned. You're going to get lots of folks that want to help, in quotes. And that can be a good thing. You have lots of alumni that want to know what's going on, what's happening to their college, that will offer things. You're going to have politicians that will come out of the woodwork, some of whom will help, some of whom won't. So you should assume that. You should know that going in. That should be part of your plan. Hopefully your information folks have a plan for that, but they will reach out directly to you because they've known you. They may be contractors, they may be architects, they may be alumni that you've given presentations to. All those folks will reach out to you. So you should assume that, and you can use that to your advantage. You want to make sure, as David said, that you've got good information, that you get them good information as quickly as possible. That should flow through the university's information officer. And so you're just echoing that. But as I said, they will want to help. So assume that that's going to happen and have roles for them. It may be something minor, but use that help and know that it's coming, and so try to figure out how you're going to guide it. The other item that I would say, and this probably goes without saying, but I think we all know, facilities folks are terrific in a crisis, because we're used to that all the time, right? We have a generator that goes down, or we have a leak. We have those kind of issues all the time. So for us, yeah, the magnitude is geometrically quantified or expanded, but we're used to that. And I know your teams are like the ones David and I have been lucky to have. They're tremendously dedicated to the university. I know, Armando, you said the same thing when we were talking yesterday. And so it's easy to kind of forget that. And in almost every case, they're dealing with the same kind of stuff at home. So it probably goes without saying, but you need to make sure while you're taking care of the campus, you take care of your team. So simple things like making sure you're constantly praising them, that you're constantly publicly, when you give their press releases, you're talking about that. You put them front and center. That's really important. That kind of praise is important. We did simple things like just feeding them is a big deal. So one of the things we had our secretaries do was drive carts throughout the campus filled with goodies and water and soft drinks and stuff, just to fuel folks and let them know that we were thinking about them. It maybe cost us a couple $100, but it was probably worth $100,000 worth of effort. And I'm sure there's other things too. And I know that probably goes without saying, but it is so critical. You want to make sure you don't lose sight of the fact that it's your team that's going to make this happen, and you need to make sure. Maybe you've got a side plan, but some part of you has a plan for how you're going to deal with all those kind of things.
And perfect segue. I think recognition of your folks was very important. These are some pictures of some different groups. Top right was our ride out team. Top left was our projects planning group. And the bottom was most of our facility services group. So just to give you an overall assessment, we had about a 60% show rate on our maintenance and operations staff the first week. So because of generally they were in the impact area and they were dealing with their own lives. So you can expect probably something like that. That's why that 80% for custodial was quite amazing that they showed up, very dedicated. So we've done a lot of stuff to recognize them. They've had more free lunches than anybody on campus over the last 6 months. So, and they've gotten all sorts of good swag. So we've taken good care of them. And I think that was the last slide. So we were up for questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mike Gitter from Tulane. I was just curious, from our experience, lessons learned, we have a national contract with BMS CATS. So, we have, when we were in the cone, BMS CATS stages outside of the cone with, supplies, all those things that you can't get after the event. So, because you mentioned, which is true, senior leadership wants answers immediately. So to help that, now we have a national contract with BMS CATS to come in immediately after the disaster to mitigate. Then we also have a national contract with a consultant company that brings in 20 called DART teams to go and do building assessments. So within our plan, hopefully in 24 hours, we'll have building assessments and mitigation of the building.
Absolutely.
Do you have any of those contracts?
We have, we and I didn't get into some of the longer term efforts. We did have an emergency response contractor that came in and did a lot of the initial help in terms of getting in and dewatering. Then we brought in a company called Jacobs Engineering, and they did a lot of the long-term assessment. It sounds very similar to what you're calling the DARP, where they went in and looked at the individual buildings on a much more in-depth basis than what my maintenance staff did, and to look at other issues. So yes, it's a tiered response. The Jacobs Engineering report that came back is very key in terms of dealing with FEMA. They lack seeing that at the bottom of the that engineer stamp at the bottom of the assessment, and it has made us dealing with them much easier. So.
What it is, BMS CATS has an agreement with FEMA, so it's already been approved.
I'm not familiar with that, so that would have been awesome.
When they come in, we don't have to go through the whole FEMA approval process.
Absolutely. Awesome. Yes, sir.
So, John Holmes from HBU, and so during Harvey, we also pre-staged, and something that I learned that I didn't know was the equipment that you pre-stage that you use, FEMA will pay for, but if you pre-stage it, you don't use it for whatever reason, and that is not part of the.
I will tell you, FEMA's rules are interesting at best. I'm not even going to pretend I understand them. We actually brought in a third-party consultant to help us deal with FEMA because it is a total, common sense does not apply. So don't even pretend it does. So.
Yeah, we had a third party as well, because we were still dealing with FEMA's on Allison 7 years later when I hit. So we had the joy of dealing with them as two emergencies at the same time. And I knew that, yeah, you can't pre-stage if you don't use it, but it's good insurance.
Oh, it's,
you know.
we paid that money happily, I mean, I was glad.
And I will say, we've got similar contracts in Tennessee, even though obviously hurricanes aren't the issue because of other potential issues. And we've used them, we also have used those companies for smaller events, just so we get used to working with each other. So I would suggest that you might, if you have those kind of contracts, you might try to use them for some other things, just so you learn the players and they learn you and they learn the campus.
We've used them for several issues, not even related to hurricanes. One of the other thing you mentioned, I'm just curious, you mentioned sheltering in place students. You don't have any reciprocal agreements with other universities to evacuate students to?
Well, most of our students come from the Houston metropolitan area, generally speaking. Our mayor made a decision early on that he was not going to mandate an evacuation of the city. I mean, he did not want to put 6 million people on the roads, which, that would have been pure chaos. So we ended up sheltering in place as a general rule. Now, a lot of our students are international. That was the majority of the 2,000 students that were staying in the dorms during the event simply because they couldn't get out of town. A lot of them went home and stayed with their parents. We are, there's not a lot else around here in terms of size-wise we are the biggest entity in the place. That's why they were bringing up students from Victoria. So we ended up being the place that everybody went. So, as Dave mentioned earlier, so that was how it ended up rolling out. Would I do it differently if I could? Probably. But at the same time, where are you going to put 2,000 students? Where are you going to roll them out? So semester's already started and everybody's dorms are full. So, unless they want to live in a gymnasium, perhaps.
Well, actually, that's where we have an agreement with the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and they actually put our students in the gym.
Yeah. Okay.
Gym and several other, some in the football stadium, some in basketball arena. We try not to shelter in place, but as you say, sometimes they pop up so quick, you really can't. But our hurricane plan is, we lost about close to over 2,000 that live on, I'm sorry, about 5 hours. So it's in our hurricane plan, the Boston to Alabama.
That's an interesting thought. I don't know if we've actually looked into that any further. It's a good thought. Yeah. well, we could hit a lot, so it may be something we need to look at. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you can hear me. You said use the microphone. So, my name is Armando Rodriguez. I'm coming from the Pontifical Catholic University in Puerto Rico. And even though I'm in accord with many of the things that you said, if you allow me, I would like to share some of our experiences and maybe some suggestions that may be good for some of you. One thing that nobody talks about is communication, because they think that they won't fall. A lot of time ago, and probably most of you or all of you have changed from landlines to voice over IP communications. Also, you have traded walkie-talkies for cellular phones to speak to your people, your maintenance people. So what happened in Puerto Rico? All communications they all fall. So they were all lost. So we had no communication with our people, nowhere around the island. So regarding that point, I can say that we used to think that water, food, things like that were the most important. I can tell you that right now that they're still one of the most important, but they're not the most important. Communication is more important because you don't know what's happening anywhere. And if you don't know what's happening, you don't know what to do. So you need to enforce probably a much stronger communication plan to be prepared to, in case everything falls, that you lose all communications, you have something else, a way to communicate. And the way to do it is it's pretty simple. So what we did was just go back to where there was no phones. So I visited personally all the campuses around the island and just said, this is going to be the central place where all communications go through, which was the main entrance, where the guards were going to be there 24/7. I left the message there. I sent couriers every other day. So if you needed anything, just send me the communication. I'll send somebody there, or you send me somebody to the guardhouse of the campus I'm at, and that's the way we communicate throughout the island. So I mean that worked for us. I don't know if it's going to work for you, because we are, even though we have 3 campuses, we are a much smaller school than most of you are. Our main campus is only 80 acres. We have about 10,000 students in that campus. So when we talk about University of Houston, which is probably as big as Puerto Rico. So, but anyhow, it's just everybody here is capable of working in an emergency. But however, to learn from the experiences of others will help you when you get to work with the emergency. You were talking about plans. I can tell you that having a plan is better than having none. So even though the problem with plans is that get stuck into somewhere in your office, having a plan is better than having none, because it means that you have discussed this with somebody else on a probably higher level or your level, and you have think some things through beforehand. So it's better to have a plan than having no plan at all. Saying that, no plan is perfect. So it will depend on what really happens. So until the emergency happens, you really don't know what you're going to do. Also, things that you probably will delay for a second phase or third phase when you're constructing a building, you might have to rethink to keep them on the first phase, as you were talking about emergency generators. There are things that sometimes you delay for a second phase. Well, don't do it anymore. And the reason for that is that it's the 2 words, business continuity. This is the business ending. So if you can't keep working, you cannot get tuition. You cannot get tuition, you can't keep working. Because, there's no insurance in the world, and we are fortunately very well insured. But there's no insurance in the world that's gonna keep paying you for 6 months or a whole year. So you need to keep working. Those kids are gonna leave. They're gonna end up leaving. They're gonna wait. They're not gonna wait for you. So they're gonna go to other colleges or other universities. So business continuity is the most important thing. And that's very good, because that's you can present this to everybody at your school, to those BP that only see numbers. And I don't want to sound, please don't take this in a wrong way. It's a business, so you can present this in the business, as a business proposition, for them to put money into these, because it's about continuing business. As a humanitarian aspect, the other part of it. It's also very important, and you can present this to other people on that aspect too. We had we needed to take care of our students, of our people, of our personnel, and some other people around the community too. And then that's very important, because in that way, first of all, you're doing a humanitarian, thing. Second, you can expect that they are going to give back because they received help when they need it. Your students may have lost their homes. Your employees may have lost their homes, as it happened to us. Even though they kept coming, as I told you, right, Dave? They kept coming. What I did is that on the first day, I met with everybody and said, first, how's everybody? Is everybody here? Not everybody was there. So I sent people to look for those that were not there. And then I told them, you are not required to come to work if you cannot. So forget about anything else. Come if you can, if it's safe for you. So when you said, and this is a part where I'm probably maybe not in accord of what you said, David, and this is maybe suggestions I will give to you. You don't need to bring everybody the first day. Your safety is more important. So you will be able to control less people and make sure that everything is safe if you are working with less people at the beginning, and then you'll bring it, because you do need everybody. Nobody knows better the place and what happened to the place they work at than the people are actually working there. So there's no maintenance guy that knows more than the administrator that works at that office of what happened in his office. You need him. You need him, yes. But safety first. At least that's just from my experience what was good for us. And the other thing is that in regard of how you went, everybody went to check on their buildings and stuff on the campus. We divided the campus in quadrants to be able to do it more effectively, and then put some people to work on specific quadrants. Okay, because we didn't go on a because everybody thinks their building is more important than everybody else's. So there's no way to fight that at that point. So we just divided it in quadrants, and we were able to be back operational in 1 month, which was the fastest. We were the first to be operational throughout the island, and that's the way we did it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think we ran a few minutes over, but I apologize. Hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, we'll be around. So thank you.